The Jaguars went into the offseason needing to address the wide receiver position a lot. They did. Was it enough? Yeah. And I'll tell you why in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to another edition of Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen. I am Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast, which you can find on YouTube, and you don't have to pay for it. That's right. Subscribe. Subscription is free over on YouTube. Make sure you go over and subscribe to Locked On Jaguars, hit the like button, and then hit the bell so that you can get notifications each and every time we drop a show. Also, wherever you get your audio podcast, make sure you tap into that location every single day so that you don't miss an episode while you're driving or whatever it is you're doing. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. And shout out to the everydayers for joining me and us here every day on Locked On Jaguars. We are glad that you did. We're going to talk about some receivers today. About the time we end the show, I hope you realize I will say that there's no more excuses about weapons. Don't mean that these guys are all going to pan out, but if they don't, then we then have to either go to the person that selected them or the person that's calling the plays. Perhaps even the person that's throwing the football. All of those things will be on the table, but they have gone out and have sold out and addressed this position for really about the second or third time during this regime. And this is about all the times you get, and this is where it needs to be, what it's supposed to be. So we'll talk about that, and we'll crescendo to that in segment 3. We're going to do a little Zay appreciation, talk about the importance of having guys like Zay Jones who can be good enough for you and help you get better until you get better. We'll discuss that while also giving him his flowers for what he brought to the table. But we're not going to bury it. We're going to start out. We're talking about the wide receiver room as a whole. Has it gotten bigger and better? It has gotten bigger. Has it gotten better? And is that better? Is that good enough to challenge the best teams in the league for supremacy? They have gotten bigger. They have gotten better. Is it good enough? We're going to see. Because in my opinion, there are a lot of things that goes into whether or how you guys or how we all look at and judge these wide receivers. One of the things that we can say is Zay Jones can probably, who got let go yesterday, he could probably say, well, damn, if we had a center or we had people who could keep the ball or keep the quarterback upright long enough, maybe I'd still be in Jacksonville because maybe we'd gone to the playoffs and all of this. You know what? If was a fifth, we'd all be drunk, right? It's too early to be that way, but you know what I mean. The bottom line is we can go through those scenarios and we can do that all day and until we're blue in the face. But the bottom line is the Jaguars had to get better at wide receiver. One of the reasons they had to get better, another reason is because you really have to be able to judge Trevor Lawrence for what he is. And I know they're working on a contract extension. And if everyone has their druthers, you're going to get that extension before you even see him with this new group. So this is all about the timing of team building and when you say when and when guys agree to contracts, and you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them as an organization. So all of these things and all of these questions had to be brought up, and some of them don't get answered before you have to make a decision. And they firmly believe, and everybody around the National Football League isn't with them on this, that Trevor Lawrence is the answer quarterback. I think you've seen enough that you don't have to wait for the actual results. I think it's worth the chance to take on Trevor Lawrence as your quarterback and pay him all that money at this point. Because I know the worst he's going to be. The worst he's going to be ain't going to be a bust. But I know people will say that if he's not the next coming of, hell, I can't even think of anybody. Because if I say Andrew Luck, some people will say, well, that ain't great. But the bottom line is, I do believe that Trevor Lawrence is worth it, but we do have to make sure that we exhaust everything to both protect him and to weaponize him. So they did that this year. They did get another center. They're hell bent on thinking that if you bring that offensive line back and get them healthy, that they'll be fine and that you can develop some young players behind them. But they really went out and did a lot with this wide receiver class. And I was wondering when they were going to, if they were really, really going to address this, because a lot of people, including me, thought that they may go DB early in the first round. But the more I looked at it, the more I told myself they can't do that, which is why I had them going wide receiver in the media mock draft for Locked On NFL. I actually had them taking Adonai Mitchell because Brian Thomas Jr. was gone. I said that Quinyon Mitchell would be the one guy that I would run to the podium for. They didn't do it. They didn't run to the podium for him. Their guy was Brian Thomas Jr., and I believe him when they say that. And I don't blame them. I like him. I always have. Big, tall. If one more person tells me he reminds me of them of DJ Chark, I'm going to go crazy. Doesn't remind me of DJ Chark. He reminds me of Brian Thomas. Now, he has a smooth running style about him that reminds me of one of the GOATs, but he doesn't play like that guy. But he does have a smooth running style. And then he's really, really, really fast. And I think he has a strong lower body, and I think he's going to really, really improve and get better at the things that you didn't see him do. Just because you didn't see him do a lot of stuff on tape doesn't mean you can't do it. Gabe Davis. I like the fact that I don't know if it's the routes that they ran up in Buffalo, but a lot of the tape and the highlights that I saw of Gabe Davis and a lot of my independent recollection tells me that Gabe Davis is really good at running down the seams where those hash marks are. And I love guys that do that. One of the reasons I love guys that do that is because it challenges the entire defense to have to play honest and stay home. But the other reason is, for the Jaguars' purposes, I love the fact that they got somebody who did something that people on this team does not do very well or didn't do. And I don't know if it's schematic or if it's skill set or if it's both. If it's a scheme based off of the fact that they didn't really have anybody who had that skill. Now, folks can tell me about Evan Ingram all day, but go watch Evan Ingram. He is a drag route. He is a banana. He is always hanging out in that flat area or in that, maybe he sit down in the middle of a route, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a guy who has linebackers running with him, and they can see him running in between the window of the linebackers and the safeties. The Jags offense has been criticized so much by people saying that it's just too many screens, there's too many quick outs. I think they were trying to get the ball into the hands of their playmakers last year, but they just didn't. They knew they didn't have time, and it goes back to what Nick Bosa said. Nick Bosa said he's going to take away the first look. He ain't gonna have time to get to the second one because they knew what Trevor was doing. He was trying to get the ball out of his hand real quick because he couldn't be protected. And most people took those comments as Trevor not being able to read defenses, and that's not true. If anything, it showed a propensity to be a little bit predictable. And I think that predictability was predicated because of the offense being limited personnel-wise outside with talent. And even when they had Calvin Ridley, who is talented, didn't quite get and understand either it's their fault or his fault. Doesn't matter whose fault it was. The bottom line is it appeared that there was a disconnect and he didn't understand what he was supposed to be doing. So if that happens, regardless of whose fault it is, when it comes to on Sunday, it just looks like a mess. So it just looked like they needed to address that. And they were going to address it anyway. I think Gabe Davis was never the replacement for Calvin Ridley. Gabe Davis was going to be the replacement for Zay Jones. However, the reason why Zay Jones probably stuck around through the draft is because they had to make sure that they got BTJ, Brian Thomas Jr., because it was the same situation that folks were trying to say that the Jaguars needed to do with Cam Robinson. Well, if they're going after the tackle, hang on to Cam just in case they don't get their guy, then they can keep Cam and go to another position. Well, that's what they did with Zay. And then when they got Brian Thomas, and remember, they signed Devin Duvernay also. They signed 2 wide receivers. And at that point, I was wondering, what are they doing? Because this is a loaded draft up top. This is a loaded. They signed Duvernay and they signed Gabe Davis, and they were trying to keep Calvin Ridley. So my thing was, this is the draft where I really want them to invest something in something early into the new guys in the draft. It appeared they weren't going to do that, but then they did. It wasn't just because of Calvin Ridley. I'm going to tell you why I think all of this happened and why all of this broke out this way. And why, believe it or not, sometimes not keeping a guy like Calvin Ridley is a good thing, because had they kept Calvin Ridley, they wouldn't have Brian Thomas Jr., who I think is a young star in the making. We're going to talk about that, talk about Zay Jones, the appreciation, and the role that guys like that play when you're trying to build a team. We'll discuss that in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. First, I got to let you know about today's sponsor, which is eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and leave it and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, available to U.S. customers. And I gotta let you know about Gametime. And the reason why I'm doing this, man, about the Gametime app, is because so many people want to buy tickets to sporting events. And then what happens? They wait till the last minute. Or maybe you're waiting on your paycheck to come and you get paid on the day of the event. Well, people used to say stuff like, well, your lack of preparation is not my emergency. That is nonsense when it comes to Gametime, because your lack of preparation or your procrastination is exactly what they are here for, because they specialize in last minute deals that save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On NFL. I'll spell it LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you again for joining me, Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast, where it's your team every day. We always thank you for making us your first listen here on Locked On Jaguars. We're talking about the wide receiver room in Jacksonville, how it has gotten bigger, and I believe how it has gotten a little bit better. Before I go on, I had a buddy of mine. He actually used to play for the Jaguars, my buddy Michael. He hit me up and said, who's the Jaguars' third receiver? Do you think they're going to be in trouble if they get an injury? Yeah. So here's the thing. And I was just joking with Mike, but and I'm compounding this and tagging this along with some other people who tweeted me. Generally in the NFL, if you're A and you're B, if your number one and your number two receiver get hurt, you got some problems. All right. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Does Zay Jones help you keeping Zay Jones, does that help you if those guys go down? Would you be better off having Zay and say Brian Thomas Jr. or Zay and Christian Kirk than you would? Let's say Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis go down, or whatever. Take two of those top three and make them go down. Would you be better served having Zay? Well, the Jaguars seem to think maybe not, considering what the cost is, and that's the part of making this evaluation and determination a lot of people seem to want to forget about, and that is the cost. So for everyone that does the fantasy football and everyone that does the building the teams on game day, and each player, great players that produce a lot of yards like Tyreek Hill, they cost a whole bunch, right? And other players don't. That's a sort of a pseudo way of being a GM, where like you can't just like have a fourth receiver that makes $7-8 million. It doesn't work like that. Usually it doesn't. Sometimes in rare situations, when like the Bengals were in for a long time, when they had two guys on rookie deals, and they were both very, very good in T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, you can pull that off. You can get away with having two guys on rookie deals. And then you could have your third and fourth receiver also be guys making $7-8 million. But for the most part, the Jaguars had made a decision with their wide receiver core that they needed to be bigger and more physical. The fact that they thought that they were going to be able to keep Calvin Ridley, and they went after Gabe Davis, and they already have Christian Kirk. In my opinion, that was the signal that Zay Jones was the odd man out, whether it be because of his injuries, whether it be because they just needed to upgrade those positions. They're going to upgrade the number one and the number two positions, and that was going to relegate Zay going down to maybe wide receiver 4 or maybe even wide receiver 5 from a roster standpoint, because Devin Duvernay is a return guy along with the wide receiver and a bit of a Swiss Army knife. So he's on the roster. So that really pushes you down to wide receiver 5. And something that I said yesterday on yesterday's show, I was talking about the rookie Cephas. One of the things that I, because everybody keeps hitting me up about him being the undrafted free agent, that him being a guy that might make this team and all of that. And I say, well, if he does, the target should be Zay Jones. The target should not be Parker Washington. And I wanted to be clear about that. And the reason why is because Devin Duvernay is on this team. You had whoever they are trying to make the other receiver. So you got Duvernay at number 4, Parker Washington at 5, or either Parker Washington at 4, Duvernay at 4, or 5 or at 4. It doesn't make it. That means you got 5 guys, right? So they got Cooks left over from last year. They have a number of players that are still on the team from last year. They got the undrafted free agent that they brought in. There's going to be a lot of competition for number 6. If they keep 6, I think they will keep 6. I do. I really do. So that's why yesterday, when I did not know before, I recorded before the Zay Jones move. So if I did that, the reason why I said that this kid needs to be hoping that he's good enough, or whoever needs to be hoping that they're good enough to take Zay Jones' spot, is because I understood the economics of the NFL and how they do these position groups. And then not 2 hours after I finished the show, Zay Jones was gone. And not long after that, the Jacksonville Jaguars actually put out a Zay Jones appreciation thanking him. And I think it's important that we understand that this is just a business move and it's a profession. It's what happens. It's a job. Nobody understands that more than NFL players. Nobody understands that more than Zay. This is his 3rd team. After being a first-round pick, this is his 3rd team. But it's still very important for guys to be professionals. A lot of people thought the Jaguars overspent when they gave Zay his contract. He earned it. Now, he had some moments, like he had a great game one week, and then the next week my wife wanted to slap box him because he kept dropping passes. And some of those passes were first down passes, things that could have kept drives going. But then you don't want to complain because you remember the Baltimore drive and the game-winning touchdown and the 2-point conversion and the times when Zay was critical to this team coming back against the Chargers and the Cowboys that first year of Doug Peterson, the year the Jaguars turned it around and went to the playoffs. It's very important that you understand that everybody that they go sign in free agency isn't going to be a superstar, but they can be somebody that comes in, turns around, does their job, exceeds expectations, and lifts the franchise, and that's what Zay Jones did. And that's why I'm happy that they showed him some appreciation. Although I was one of those guys that was like, okay, we got to move on, because what happens in team building, man, you have to at some point determine whether a guy is good or not to consistently be the number 2 wide receiver on your team if you are trying to win a championship. I think the answer was no. I think good player, great person, but I do believe that this team felt like an upgrade was needed. And really, it's Gabe. Gabe is taking Zay. He took Zay's lunch money. That's what he did. Or they gave it to him. Calvin Ridley is being replaced by the rookie. And Christian Kirk's going to have to just keep being Christian Kirk. Parker Washington's going to have to build on whatever it was that they liked in him or saw in him last year, or he's going to get overtaken by some young guys. And Devin Duvernay, I believe, is on the team. I believe he's just a bigger version of Jamal Agnew. He's fast, too. He might not be as twitchy as Jamal Agnew, might not be as quick, and he might not be as good of a returner, but he is good enough at a lot of different things. I saw him in the backfield, saw him at wide receiver, saw him in the slot, saw him returning kicks. So what you got a little bit bigger and more physical version of Jamal Agnew. Why will there be no more excuses for weapons? Doesn't mean that these guys that they got are good enough, but at some point, a hammer is going to fall if this doesn't work. And it's either going to be Trevor Lawrence, the receivers, who I just said were good enough, Trent, who's the one who went out and got him, or the person that's designing the offense for this team. And if it's not right, we're going to talk about it. And they'll talk about it on ESPN, and they'll talk about it everywhere else too. But if you're watching Fox Sports and ESPN on your TV all day and have to turn down the volume with all the shouting, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 streaming service, sports streaming channel program for your everyday, or for you every day, to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm going to point the finger at everybody who this could be blamed on if it goes wrong in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. I'm going to tell you about Monopoly Go. It's a twist to one of your favorite games you ever played, and now you can play it again, but just do it differently. You can play with hundreds of people on hundreds of different boards with Monopoly Go, a new game that has been downloaded by over 150 million people. If you're competitive, you love team building, you just love hanging out with your family and friends, and you just love playing games with a bunch of people, then this is the game for you. Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges, a ton, including their own unique mini games like Digging for Treasure or Robot Pachinko Machine. And there's always new timed events that will help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get it off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Make sure you tap in with your family and friends and enjoy the newness of Monopoly Go. All right, third and final segment here on Locked On Jaguars. We're at your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen. We've talked about the wide receiver room, the fact that it has gotten bigger, it's gotten taller, gotten more physical. I believe it's gotten faster. A little bit of Zay Jones appreciation and how and why the team may have come to the conclusion that they needed to move on, and how Zay was really, really appreciated here in Jacksonville. And he'll always have a place in the hearts of the fans here. Now we're going to talk about no more excuses, because I said they have adequately addressed the wide receiver position with Brian Thomas Jr., who I really liked. And I'm not just saying this because these are players that I like. I'm saying this is because they tried it with Calvin Ridley. They initially did it with Zay Jones and Christian Kirk. And now, this is the third time. And they've finally gone to the well. They went to the first round and got a highly productive player from LSU in the SEC. I like the player. They went and got another productive, fiery, physical attitude haver in Gabe Davis. That's exactly what he is. And I don't know, there's been some people that said, well, Buffalo let him go. Why was he a free agent? Buffalo's letting everybody go. I don't know if y'all noticed. They let their center go. They let their corners go. They let the safety. The Buffalo Bills pretty much let everybody go who didn't agree to a contract extension. So that's not to say that this guy can't play because the Bills didn't re-sign him. They let everybody go. Stephon Diggs can play, and they let him go too. They traded him. So I'm a big, firm believer in Gabe Davis, only because of where he dwells, if anything, what he does and how he goes about his business as a middle of the field target and a bigger target. I just want Trevor's throws downfield to not have to be perfect all the time, right? And there were some times now we might have gotten mad at Trevor for some ball placement or deciding to throw the ball 17 yards down the field on 3rd and 1. I get it. Or on 1st and goal, throwing an interception in the end zone when you got 3 more plays to try something and extend and live another day. I get it. But there were a lot of times when Trevor hit guys on slants, on passes in the back of the end zone where they just were too small to get it. And there was a couple of times, even with Ridley, the ball hit him right in his hand and he juggled it. And we all chalked it up as, man, he's been away for a while, so don't worry about it. They're not going to be giving him those excuses in Tennessee. And they're not going to give anybody else those excuses here in Jacksonville, because Jacksonville doesn't have anybody that's been sitting out for a while. They got people that's ready to go and guys that have things to prove. So it's going to fall squarely on Chad Hall, the wide receivers coach, Doug Peterson, the offensive play caller. Well, him and Press Taylor, but Doug Peterson, the head coach, and then Trent Baalke. If this doesn't work, and eventually it's going to fall on Trevor if this doesn't work. If these guys aren't good enough and this offense stumbles, now you're going to have something more definitive to point the finger at. And I know I just said definitive and I just gave you 5 different people to blame. And I ain't even mentioned the offensive line, by the way, just in case Lou Fortner wins the center position again, or Cam Robinson struggles again or gets hurt again. So then the offensive line will be back in shambles. But at this point, the choices and the decisions that they make on who they're going to draft, what units they're going to focus on, which players they're going to get, need versus best player available. At some point, we can throw all of that out the window now, because we can go, look, now, this is year 4. It's year 4, and it's year 3 without Urban. We don't need any more excuses. We don't want to hear we're not fast enough. We don't want to hear about injuries. Nobody wants to hear about the receivers aren't tall enough. Nobody wants to hear about any of that stuff. This offense has to get going, or it's going to be we need some heads to roll, and it ain't going to be Luke Fortner, and it ain't going to be Zay Jones. So this is how you get off the fence about stuff. You say what you agree with, you say what you don't agree with, but then just because you agree with it doesn't mean that if it works, you got to sit there and act like, oh, well, I would have done the same thing. I'm not him. I don't have to do that. So I'm just saying, give them the benefit of the doubt. I think they addressed what they needed to address. I believe things are looking up. I do think getting Mitch Morse helps. I would have done more on the offensive line. Everybody knows that. But if you do that, that means you're not doing some more somewhere else. So I get it, and I totally understand. I just don't want excuses to be passed out and passed around like Halloween candy anymore. Trevor's going to get his extension, so either you better figure out a way to weaponize him, and I think they've done it. But if they didn't, we're going to come back and revisit all of it. That's what we're going to do, because that's what we do here on Locked On Jaguars, man. We're going to make sure that we look at every single thing. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. I want y'all to take care of each other, man, and make sure you tap back into Locked On Jaguars every single day. It's your team every day. We appreciate you making us your first listen. Until next time, we'll see you.